My name is Eleanor, and I am 58 years old. The air in the boardroom is so cold it feels like a physical weight, a sterile chill that has nothing to do with the thermostat. It's the kind of manufactured cold that comes from glass, steel, and silence. I'm sitting at the head of a vast mahogany table in the company I founded 30 years ago with nothing but a second-hand oven and a book of my grandmother's recipes, Eleanor's Kitchen. My name is still on the frosted glass of the door. Across from me sits my son, Michael. My brilliant Ivy League son, the CEO I proudly appointed 2 years ago. He is flanked by two people I barely know. A man named Sterling with the predatory stillness of a venture capitalist, and a woman, Albright, whose sharp suit looks like it was tailored to cut people out of their own lives. They are the board, Michael's board. He doesn't look at me. His eyes are fixed on a single sheet of paper lying between us on the polished wood. He slides it forward. The sound is unnervingly loud in the silence. It's a letter, addressed to me. He finally clears his throat, a dry, rehearsed sound. "Mom," he begins, and the word feels like a violation in this room. The board has voted. He pauses, and I see a muscle twitch in his jaw. For the financial health of the company, and to posture ourselves for the next phase of growth, you're being retired, effective immediately. The words hang in the air, thick and poisonous. Retired. The word is a euphemism, a cheap kindness meant to soften a killing blow. I feel a laugh bubble up in my chest, a hysterical, broken thing. I swallow it down. I will not give them that. Retired? My voice is steady, colder than the room. I look past Michael to the two strangers staring at me with blank professional disinterest. I see. And what exactly is unhealthy about our financial situation? I lean forward, planting my hands on the table. Because I just reviewed the quarterly reports this morning. We posted an 18% year-over-year revenue increase. Our corporate catering division just landed the Chandler Weston contract, a deal worth 7 figures. Is that the kind of unhealthy performance that warrants a founder's immediate removal? Michael flinches. He wasn't expecting a fight. He was expecting tears. He was expecting me to crumble. He shuffles his papers. The numbers don't tell the whole story, Mom. Our debt-to-equity ratio is unfavorable. We're over-leveraged on assets that have sentimental, not strategic value. Sentimental value? I look him dead in the eye. You mean our bakery? The one that built our reputation in this city? The one that's still profitable? Why are we suddenly talking about debt-to-equity ratios? This company was debt-free for 25 years, Michael. The only debt we have is the loan you insisted we take out for your aggressive expansion. So why is the board, a board you handpicked, suddenly concerned about a problem you created? His face hardens. The flicker of the little boy I knew is gone, replaced by the man in the expensive suit he has become. This is exactly the kind of backward-looking, emotional thinking we can't afford. This isn't a bake sale anymore. It's a competitive marketplace. Mr. Sterling and Miss Albright agree that your presence creates a conflict of interest. It signals instability to potential investors. And at Juan Frem, I finally understand. This isn't a decision. It's a verdict. This meeting was a formality, a courtesy killing. They didn't come here to debate. They came to sign the death certificate of my life's work. The two strangers, Sterling and Albright, haven't said a word. They don't need to. They are simply paid witnesses to a matricide, corporate style. He used the structure I naively approved, the board I allowed him to create, as a weapon against me. He built a cage and tricked me into walking into it. It's all perfectly legal, perfectly ruthless. So that's it, I say, my voice dropping to a whisper. The fight drains out of me, replaced by a clarity so sharp it hurts. 30 years, wiped out in a 10-minute meeting. Michael finally looks at me, and his eyes are hollow. It's just business, Mom. The world goes silent. The only thing I can focus on is the pen in his hand, resting next to the document that erases me. It's a cross pen, chrome with gold trim, the one I bought him as a gift for his first day of business school. I remember the pride I felt watching him unwrap it, the weight of it in his young hand, a symbol of the future I had sacrificed everything to give him. He used it to sign my walking papers. How did the boy I built this all for become the man who would take it all away? To understand how my own son, my Michael, could do this we have to go back to the beginning. The beginning wasn't a boardroom. It was a cramped, galley-style kitchen in a third-floor apartment in Columbus, Ohio, back in 1995. The air, thick with the Midwest humidity of August, always smelled of yeast and vanilla. My husband, Tom, had been gone for 6 months, taken by a drunk driver on a Tuesday afternoon. He left me with a broken-down Ford Escort, a 2-year-old son named Michael, and a fear so profound it felt like a constant, low-grade fever. Grief was a luxury I couldn't afford. Survival was the only item on the menu. So, I baked. I baked before the sun came up, the quiet hum of my old Kenwood mixer, the only sound besides Michael's soft breathing from the playpen I'd wedged between the refrigerator and the wall. My first clients weren't glamorous. They were flyers I'd pinned to the bulletin board at the local library and the laundromat. Eleanor's Kitchen, home-style baking and light catering. My first paid job was providing 3 dozen lemon bars and a coffee cake for the Street Mary's book club. The pay was $40. After subtracting the cost of butter, sugar, and lemons, I made a profit of $9.50 for 5 hours of work. I remember staring at the single-dollar bills in my hand, feeling the crushing weight of that math. It was like trying to fill an ocean with a teaspoon. But every night, after I'd cleaned the kitchen, packed the next day's orders, and paid the babysitter, I would stand over Michael's playpen. I'd watch his little chest rise and fall, his face peaceful in sleep, oblivious to the precarious world I was trying to hold together for him. In those moments, my exhaustion felt like a prayer. Every bag of flour I hauled up 3 flights of stairs, every burn mark on my forearms, every dollar I stretched until it screamed it was all for him. I wasn't just building a business. I was building a wall, a fortress of security brick by painful brick, so that he would never know the cold dread of an empty pantry or a final notice taped to the door. He would have the life his father and I had dreamed of for him, a life of choice, not of necessity. My first real break came from a mistake. I was delivering a small order of sandwiches to a local law firm when I saw a frantic assistant in the lobby. The caterer for their major afternoon meeting with a client from Chicago had canceled at the last minute. 40 people were expecting lunch in an hour. Before I even knew what I was saying, I heard my own voice, clear and steady. "I can handle it." The assistant looked at my single pathetic box of sandwiches and then back at me, my apron still dusted with flour. She was desperate. "What can you do in an hour?" she asked. I didn't have a plan. I only had adrenaline and the muscle memory of 1,000 frantic hours in the kitchen. I told her I'd be back. I sprinted to the grocery store next door, spent $150 money I desperately needed for rent on rotisserie chickens, fresh baguettes, arugula, and a wheel of good provolone. I begged the store's deli manager to use their slicer. I assembled everything in the back of my sweltering station wagon. I walked back into that law firm 55 minutes later with platters of gourmet-looking chicken sandwiches, a massive green salad, and the last of the lemon bars I had in the car. It was a gamble that could have ruined me. Instead, they became my first corporate client. That 1-hour panic-driven job paid more than my entire previous month of work. That contract was the first solid brick in the wall. Soon, there were others. The hustle was relentless. I remember driving through a snowstorm to deliver a wedding cake, my old car skidding on the ice, my knuckles white on the steering wheel as I protected that 3-tiered tower of buttercream and dreams like it was my own child. I remember negotiating with suppliers, my voice shaking but my resolve firm, refusing to compromise on the quality of my ingredients even when it meant my own margins were thinner. Building a business from nothing is a series of 1,000 tiny, unglamorous acts of faith. 2 years after that first law firm lunch, I stood in front of a small, dusty storefront on a street with decent foot traffic. The faded sign above the door said, "For lease." I had exactly $3,400 in my business account, the sum total of my life's work. Signing that lease was the single most terrifying thing I had ever done. The night before we opened, I sat alone on the newly tiled floor of Eleanor's kitchen, the smell of fresh paint replacing the scent of dust and desperation. Michael, now 5, was asleep at his grandmother's house. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel a flicker of pride. It was real, a real business, with a real door and a real sign. I pulled a small, framed photo of Michael from my purse and set it on the counter. It was his school picture, his smile, missing a front tooth. I made him a silent promise. This, all of this, was for you. I will not fail. The years flew by in a blur of packed schedules and rising profits. Eleanor's kitchen grew from 1 storefront to 3. I went from a young widow in a cramped apartment to a respected business owner in our city. And Michael became the living, breathing embodiment of the promise I'd made to myself. He excelled. He got a full scholarship to Ohio State for his undergrad, and then, to my tearful, bursting pride, was accepted into the MBA program at the University of Chicago. All those pre-dawn mornings, all those 80-hour weeks, they had paid off. They had built him a launch pad to the stars. When he returned home at 28, he was transformed. He stepped out of a brand-new charcoal gray BMW, a stark contrast to the beat-up Honda Civic I'd bought him for his high school graduation. He was taller, leaner, and wore a suit that probably cost more than my first car. In his hand was his diploma, beautifully framed. "We did it, Mom," he said, hugging me. And in that moment, I felt a joy so pure it was almost painful. My son was home, my partner was home. I cleared out my own office, the one with the big window overlooking the main street, and gave it to him. We put Michael Cooper, Vice President of Strategy, on the door in gold lettering. For the first few weeks, it was perfect. He was a quiet observer, shadowing me in meetings, studying the financials, talking to the staff. I thought he was learning the business from the ground up, respecting the foundation I had built. I was wrong. He wasn't learning. He was assessing. He was scanning for weaknesses. The first red flag appeared during one of our weekly planning meetings. It was me, Michael, and my head baker, Maria, who had been with me for nearly 20 years. We were sitting around the big oak table in the back office, surrounded by the comfortable clutter of handwritten order forms and supplier invoices. I was going over the schedule for the upcoming weekend. "Okay, the mayor's charity gala is Saturday," I said, tapping a thick stack of papers. "Maria, we'll need you and the night crew to start the pastry work on Friday." And I told Mayor Thompson we'd throw in a complimentary dessert tray for his VIP table. He's been a loyal customer since day one. Before Maria could even nod, Michael spoke up, his voice cutting through the familiar rhythm of our meeting. "Why is this order on a triplicate carbon copy form? And why are we throwing in product without tracking the marketing expense against the client's lifetime value?" Maria and I exchanged a confused look. I managed a small laugh. "Honey, it's how we've always done it. It works. The mayor sends us more business than I can possibly track. And when have lugs at him." Michael leaned forward, his polite smile not reaching his eyes. "But that's the problem. We're not tracking it. We have no data. We're making business decisions based on feelings." He picked up one of the order forms with 2 fingers, as if it were a dirty napkin. "This right here is inefficiency. It's a liability." I felt a prickle of annoyance. "It's a system that has allowed this company to grow by double digits for a decade, Michael. And it's not a liability. It's a relationship." He was rousing to stand. He turned his attention to Maria. "Maria, your team's payroll is our single biggest kitchen expense. I was looking at the clock-in data. The overtime last month for the Henderson wedding cake was significant. Was that factored into the original quote?" Maria, a kind, no-nonsense woman who could sculpt sugar into a masterpiece, looked flustered. "The humidity was high that day, Mr. Cooper. The fondant wasn't cooperating. It needed extra time to get it right." "Mrs. Henderson cried when she saw it. She said it was perfect." "I'm sure it was," Michael said smoothly. "But perfect is a subjective metric. Overtime is a hard cost. We can't build a scalable model on subjective metrics." And there it was. That MBA language, cold, clinical, and utterly foreign in my warm, bustling kitchen. He was talking about Maria, a woman who had come to my house with soup when I had the flu, who had held my hand at my mother's funeral as if she were a line item, a variable to be optimized. I put my hand over Maria's. "Michael, Maria's commitment to perfection is not a liability. It's our brand. It's the reason people choose us over a cheaper competitor. It's the reason we have a scalable model." He sighed, a sound of profound, weary patience that made me feel ancient. He looked at me, and for the first time, I didn't see my son. I saw a strategist, a stranger. "Mom, listen," he said, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial tone. "You've done an incredible job. You've built a beloved local institution, a real legacy brand." He said the words like a compliment, but they landed like an insult. But legacy brands are what private equity firms call acquisition targets. They're dinosaurs. They're beautiful, they're impressive, but they're waiting for the meteor. I am trying to prevent the extinction event here. What you call relationships, the market calls inefficiency. What you call a brand, the market calls an unleveraged asset. This business needs to be disrupted from the inside out, or someone else will do it for us, and they won't be as kind as I'm being. The air went thick with what was unsaid. The implication was clear. My way was the way of the past. My way was the path to failure. My son, the boy whose future I had built with flour and butter and sleepless nights, was standing in the heart of my creation and telling me that the only thing standing between it and its own extinction was me. After Michael called my business a legacy brand, the term hung in the air between us for weeks, unspoken but always present. It was a seed of doubt he had planted, and he was patient, waiting for it to grow. Then, one Tuesday morning, he called a formal meeting. It was just me and Dave, my general manager who'd been with me since the first storefront, in the main office. Michael stood at the head of the table, his laptop connected to a projector. He was no longer just my son in the corner office. He was a presenter, a strategist taking center stage. What followed was the most impressive and terrifying presentation I had ever seen. The first slide read, "Project Ascent, Scaling the Eleanor's Kitchen Brand." For the next hour, he walked us through a vision of the future that was slick, ambitious, and utterly disconnected from the company I knew. There were bar graphs showing projected revenue growth, market analysis of competitor weaknesses, and pie charts detailing untapped consumer segments. He used a laser pointer. "Our research shows a 35% growth potential in the fast casual sector in adjacent markets like Cincinnati and Indianapolis," Michael said, clicking to a new slide. "But our current model of slow, organic growth can't capture that. We're leaving millions on the table." He outlined his three-phase plan. Phase 1 was to optimize the capital structure. This meant taking on our first-ever significant debt, a $5 million business loan. He didn't call it debt. He called it strategic growth capital. He had charts showing how we could leverage this capital to fund Phase 2, franchising. "Franchising is the key," he explained, his voice filled with passion. "It allows for rapid market penetration without the massive overhead of corporate-owned expansion. We provide the brand and the system. The franchisee provides the capital and the management." Dave, a quiet, steady man in his late 60s with flour embedded in the lines on his hands, finally spoke up. His voice was gravelly. "Franchising? Michael, our quality is based on our people. On Maria's eye for detail, on the training we do in-house. How do you control for that with a franchisee 100 miles away who's just trying to make a buck?" Michael smiled, a patient, condescending smile. "That's where Phase 3 comes in, Dave. A full corporate rebranding." He clicked the remote, and the screen changed. The warm, cursive logo of Eleanor's Kitchen vanished. In its place was a sharp, sterile logo with 2 block letters, EK. Underneath, in a generic font, it said, "Provisions." I felt the air leave my lungs. "EK Provisions?" I whispered. "Michael, where? Where is my name?" "It's right there, Mom," he said, pointing the laser at the E. "It honors you. It codifies your legacy into the brand's DNA. But Eleanor's Kitchen sounds small. It sounds local. EK Provisions sounds like a national brand. It's clean, it's scalable, it's franchise-friendly. It's not dependent on a single person." To secure the loan and manage the expansion, he proposed the final piece, forming a formal 5-member board of directors. "It's about governance, Mom. Accountability. It's what smart companies do to protect themselves. It will give our lenders confidence." Dave pushed his chair back, the sound scraping loudly in the tense silence. "Let me get this straight. You want to take on millions in debt we don't need, to sell our name to strangers who will destroy our quality, while changing that very name so it means nothing, all overseen by a board of people we don't know? Eleanor, this is insane." Michael turned to him, his expression hardening. With all due respect, Dave, you're thinking like a shop owner. I'm thinking like a CEO. This is how value is created. Everyone. Value? We've created value for 25 years by making the best food in this city and treating people right. Dave's voice was rising, his face flushed. He turned to me, his eyes pleading. Eleanor, don't do this. This isn't growth. This is erasing you. It's erasing everything we built. I was trapped. My gut, the same gut that had guided me for 3 decades, was screaming in agreement with Dave. Every instinct I had was recoiling from the cold, corporate future on that screen. But my heart saw my son, so brilliant, so confident, fighting for his vision. He was offering a future I couldn't even fathom, using a language I didn't speak. To say no felt like telling him he had failed, that his expensive education, the one I had worked so hard to give him, was worthless. Michael saw the conflict in my eyes. He walked over and stood behind me, placing his hands on my shoulders. Mom, he said softly, his voice for me alone. Look at what you built. It's incredible. Now let me take it to the next level. Let me make it immortal. Let me build a future for this family you can't even imagine. Do you trust me? The room was silent. Dave stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief. Michael's hands felt heavy on my shoulders. It was the moment of choice, my loyalty to the past versus my faith in his future. My gut versus my son. I closed my eyes, and I made the worst decision of my life. Dave, I said, my voice thin but resolute. I hear your concerns. I do. But Michael has a vision. The world is changing, and maybe we need to change with it. We need to be brave. I opened my eyes and looked at the cold, sterile EK logo on the screen. I'm approving the plan. The look on Dave's face is a memory I will take to my grave. It wasn't anger. It was a deep, profound pity. He simply nodded, stood up, and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with my son and the blueprint for my own destruction. After I gave Michael my blessing for his modernization, a strange quiet fell over my life. The company, which had been the central rhythm of my existence for 3 decades, began to move to a beat I couldn't hear. Consultants I'd never met appeared in the hallways, speaking a language of acronyms and analytics. My general manager, Dave, stopped coming to me with problems. He'd been instructed to report directly to Michael. I still had my office, but the phone rang less and less. It was like someone was slowly replacing the furniture in my house, piece by piece. One day you wake up and you don't recognize where you live anymore. About a month into this new reality, Michael came into my office. He didn't knock. He just breezed in, holding a sleek silver tablet, his face glowing with the kind of manic energy I'd come to associate with a new initiative. "Hey, Mom, got a minute?" he asked, already pulling a chair up to my desk. "I'm hitting a major bottleneck with the digital integration, and I need your help to push through it." "Of course, honey. What's wrong?" I asked, my heart doing a familiar little leap of hope. He needed me. I wasn't obsolete yet. "It's not a problem. It's a process issue," he said, tapping the screen of his tablet. "We're trying to sync the new inventory software, the QuickBooks Enterprise Suite, and the main bank accounts to create a unified financial dashboard. It's the nerve center for the whole franchise model. But I can't authorize the final sync because your credentials are the only ones with primary administrative privileges. The system needs one admin to rule them all, so to speak. Can't it?" He smiled, making it sound like a fun, technical puzzle. But my stomach tightened. I was the only one with those privileges for a reason. They were the final safeguards, the keys to the kingdom. "I can authorize it for you," I offered, reaching for my keyboard. "Just tell me what to click." He shook his head, his expression a perfect blend of patience and frustration. "That's the bottleneck, Mom. It's not a one-time click. It's a constant handshake between the programs. If a supplier payment needs to be expedited or we need to shift funds for a new franchise launch, I can't be running to you for a password every time. It's just not efficient. For this to work, for my plan, the one you approved, to work, I need to be the primary admin. I need full administrative access to streamline our entire digital footprint." He said it so reasonably. He used my own approval as leverage. He wasn't staging a coup. He was simply carrying out my orders. To deny him would be to sabotage the very vision I had publicly endorsed. He had me trapped in my own logic. "Okay," I said, the word feeling thin and weak. "What do you need?" A relieved grin spread across his face. "Great. This will speed things up immensely." He opened a password manager app on his tablet. "Let's just go down the list." The next 20 minutes were a quiet, methodical dismantling of my identity. He started with the biggest one. "Okay, what are the primary login credentials for the Chase Business Banking portal?" I hesitated. The password was TommyBoy1993. Tom, my late husband, and the year Michael turned 1. It was a secret, sacred thing. I took a deep breath and spelled it out for him, letter by painful letter. I watched his fingers fly across the tablet's screen, capturing it, storing it. That password wasn't just a string of characters. It was a memory, a history. To him, it was just data. Next was QuickBooks, the financial soul of my company. Every dollar I'd ever earned or spent was recorded there. I was the only person with the admin password. I gave it to him. He typed it in, and a green checkmark appeared on his screen. Another vault opened. He went down the list. The login for our payroll provider, ADP. The master account for our point-of-sale system. The passwords for the company's Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages, the places where I had personally answered customer comments for years. Each one I gave him felt like I was handing over a piece of my own body. My eyes, my voice, my hands. When it was over, he stood up, looking energized. "Perfect. This is a game changer. Now I can really get to work. Thanks for your help, Mom." He gave my shoulder a quick, distracted squeeze, and then he was gone, leaving me in the silent office. I sat there for a long time, staring at my computer screen. My hands felt light, empty. Out of a strange, masochistic habit, I opened my web browser and navigated to the Chase Business login page. I typed in my username. Then, my fingers moving on their own, typed the familiar password. TommyBoy1993. I hit enter. The screen flashed red. "The username or password you entered is incorrect." He had already changed it. Of course he had. It was efficient. I stared at the message, and the full, crushing weight of what I had done finally landed. I hadn't just given him access. I had been written out of the story. I was now a guest in the house I had built, a founder in name only, a ghost haunting the halls of my own life. The 6 months after I signed over control were a masterclass in psychological warfare. It began subtly. My title was changed from founder and president to the more honorific and powerless founder and chairwoman. My weekly meetings with the kitchen staff were canceled and replaced with efficiency audits run by Michael's consultants. I was a queen in exile, given a comfortable castle but stripped of all authority. I told myself this was progress. This was the future I had agreed to. But the red flags that had been waving gently were about to catch fire. The alarm bell rang on a Thursday morning. It wasn't an email or a memo. It was a phone call to my personal cell from a number I knew by heart. It was Frank Peterson. His family's dairy farm had been supplying Eleanor's kitchen with milk, cream, and butter for 25 years. I'd known his father. "Eleanor, sorry to bother you at home," he said, his voice strained with an awkwardness that wasn't natural for him. "But I'm in a bit of a bind here. We're 90 days out on 3 months of invoices. I keep calling your accounts department, and I either get a voicemail or some young kid who tells me it's in process. I've never been late on a payment from you in my life." My blood ran cold. 90 days? Frank, that's impossible. Let me look into it and call you right back. I hung up, my heart pounding with a familiar, sickening dread. I went straight to my laptop, navigated to the banking portal, and was met with the cold, digital wall I'd hit once before. Access denied. The same thing happened when I tried to log into QuickBooks. I was completely blind. For the first time, I had no idea what was happening inside my own company's finances. Furious, I walked down the hall to the accounting office, a space that used to be a storage closet before Michael's expansion. I didn't recognize the 2 young accountants he'd hired. I had to introduce myself. It was humiliating. "I need to see the accounts payable aging report," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The junior accountant, a kid who couldn't have been older than 22, looked at me with a blank stare. "I'll have to get authorization from Mr. Cooper for that." The rage that flashed through me was so hot it almost made me dizzy. "Young man," I said, my voice dangerously low, "my name is on the sign outside. Get me the report, now." He scurried off and returned a few minutes later with a stack of papers, his hands trembling slightly. I took them and went back to my office. It was worse than I thought. There was Frank's name, with a balance of over $12,000, glowing red in the 90-plus days column, and he wasn't alone. Our specialty flour mill in Lancaster, our produce supplier, even the local company that cleaned our aprons, all of them were in the same column. We were systematically starving the very people who had helped us grow. I stormed into Michael's office, waving the papers. He was on the phone, laughing about something. He saw my face, held up a finger for me to wait, and finished his call with a cheerful, "Okay, let's circle back on the EOD numbers. Ciao." He swiveled in his chair to face me. "What's up, Mom?" "This is what's up," I said, slamming the report down on his glass desk. "Frank Peterson just called my personal number. We are 90 days past due on his invoices, along with half our long-term suppliers. We are stiffing them, Michael." "Why?" He didn't even look at the report. He leaned back, tenting his fingers, the picture of calm. "Mom, I need you to take a breath. It's handled. It's part of a deliberate strategy." "A strategy? What strategy involves destroying our reputation and bankrupting our partners?" "It's called managing our cash flow cycle," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "We're extending our payment terms to leverage our accounts payable. It's a standard practice for a company in an aggressive growth phase. It allows us to utilize our capital for high-return investments instead of letting it sit in a supplier's bank account." I stared at him, trying to cut through the corporate fog. "Why is there a cash flow problem to begin with? Where is the $5 million you borrowed? Why are we leveraging Frank Peterson's milk money to grow?" He sighed, as if explaining a complex theorem to a child. "The loan was for capital expenditures, franchise, infrastructure, marketing, technology. It's not for operational costs. That's like Business 101. Look, this is complicated financial engineering. It's about managing the burn rate, optimizing working capital, and ensuring our balance sheet is attractive to the next round of investors." He spoke the words as if they were a magic spell that could make the facts disappear. "I don't care about the next round of investors." My voice was shaking now. "I care about the people who have trusted us for decades. Frank Peterson has kids in college. We are hurting him." That's when he stood up, his face a mask of cold disappointment. "And that, right there, is why you can't be involved in these decisions anymore. You're too emotional. You're thinking about one farmer. I'm thinking about a $50 million valuation. You see a late bill. I see a strategic asset. You don't understand the business we're in now." He walked around the desk and stood in front of me, looking down at me. "Honestly, Mom, I'm glad I locked you out of the financials. Not to be cruel, but to protect the company from this kind of sentimental, small-time thinking. You're just not equipped for this level of strategy." I left his office, the papers still sitting on his desk, unread. He hadn't refuted a single fact I'd presented. He had simply declared my facts, my experience, my entire business philosophy, irrelevant. He had made me feel like a hysterical, incompetent old woman. The sirens were screaming in my ears, but he had looked me right in the eye and told me it was just the wind, and the most terrifying part was, a small, poisoned part of my brain was starting to believe him. After our confrontation over the unpaid bills, I retreated. The fight had exhausted me, but worse, it had planted a seed of doubt in my own sanity. Michael's confidence was so absolute, his logic so impenetrable, that I began to believe him. I told myself I was the one who was out of touch. I was a baker, not a financier. What did I know of leveraging assets or managing cash flow cycles? I was like a sailor who had learned to navigate by the stars, suddenly adrift in a world run by GPS, feeling obsolete and foolish. So, I fell silent. I became the figurehead he wanted me to be. I smiled at company events, tasted new product formulations I knew were inferior, and nodded along in meetings where the language was so thick with jargon it was meaningless to me. I chose ignorance because it was less painful than the truth. 2 weeks before the end, the city's Chamber of Commerce gave me a Lifetime Achievement Award. There was a big dinner at a downtown hotel. Michael insisted on introducing me. He stood at the podium, under the warm lights, and delivered a speech that brought tears to my eyes. He spoke of my courage as a young widow, my tireless work ethic, my unwavering commitment to quality. He called me his hero, the foundation upon which everything was built. As I stood on that stage, holding the heavy glass award, with the entire room giving me a standing ovation, I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in years. I saw my son looking at me with what I mistook for love and admiration. The doubts, the fears, the unpaid invoices, they all melted away in that moment of public validation. I thought, I was wrong. He does see me. He does respect me. It was all a performance, a perfectly staged piece of theater designed to soften me up for the final kill. The next morning, he walked into my office, his face alight with a victor's smile. He was holding 2 cups of coffee, just like he used to. "Big day, Mom," he said, setting one on my desk. "I wanted you to be the first to know. I've been in negotiations for weeks, and I finally closed them." "Closed what, honey?" I asked, still basking in the glow of the previous night. "Our future," he said, his voice brimming with excitement. "Vantis Capital, that's Mr. Sterling's firm. They're ready for a second-round investment. A big one, $20 million. This is the move that takes us from a regional player to a national brand. This is the dream, Mom, your dream, made immortal. This is no down the down." He made it sound like a triumph, a gift he was laying at my feet, but a cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. "An investment? Michael, what do they want in return?" "A controlling interest, of course," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "And 2 seats on the board, it's standard. To finalize the deal, we just need to pass a board resolution to issue the new shares and formalize the new corporate structure. We've scheduled a meeting for tomorrow morning at 10. And it's us." He saw the look on my face. He quickly moved to reassure me, his voice becoming smooth as silk. "Mom, this is just a formality, a rubber stamp, but it's an important one. We need to show a united front. I appointed 2 new members to the board last week to satisfy the preliminary terms of the deal, Mr. Sterling, our new partner, and a woman named Brenda Albright. She's one of the top restructuring consultants in the country, a real shark. We need her expertise." He had stacked the board. The corporate structure I had approved, the one with 5 members, was now complete. Me, Michael, and 3 strangers. My voice was barely a whisper. "And what is my role in this meeting?" He smiled warmly, the same smile from the podium the night before. "Your role is the most important of all. You're the founder, the soul of the company. You just have to be there to bless the deal, to give it your moral authority. No need to prepare anything. Just sit back and watch your son bring home the biggest win in this company's history." He was so convincing, so earnest. The doubts in my mind felt like a betrayal of the son who had just, in front of the whole city, called me his hero. I pushed them down, one last time. I chose to believe him. I chose to trust the child I had raised, not the cold strategist he had become. "Okay, Michael," I said, forcing a smile. "I'll be there." The next morning, I dressed with care. I put on my best navy blue suit, the one I always wore for big presentations. I felt a sense of pride, of occasion. This was it, the culmination of 30 years of work. My son was about to secure our family's future forever. I walked down the long, quiet hallway toward the main boardroom. The hallway was new, part of Michael's renovations. It was lined with brushed steel and impersonal art. It didn't feel like my company anymore, but today, I told myself, it would feel like our victory. I reached the heavy oak doors of the boardroom. I could hear the low murmur of voices from inside. My heart was beating with anticipation, not fear. I felt like a mother on graduation day, watching her child step onto the stage to receive his prize. I took a deep, steadying breath, smoothed the front of my jacket, and put my hand on the cold brass handle. The boardroom door clicks shut, and the flashback ends. I'm back in the present, back in the suffocating silence of my house. A week after the execution, the world I had built for 30 years had been dismantled in less than 30 minutes. In the days that followed, grief wasn't an emotion, it was a tenant. It sat in my late husband's favorite armchair, it slept on the other side of my bed, and it followed me from room to room, a constant, heavy shadow. The house was a museum of a life that was no longer mine. On the mantelpiece was a photo of a 5-year-old Michael, beaming proudly in a tiny baseball uniform I had worked an all-nighter to pay for. His framed MBA hung on the wall of the study, a testament to a dream that had turned into a weapon. Every object was a betrayal. Friends called. I didn't answer. Maria, my dear Maria, left a container of her famous chicken soup on my porch. I didn't have the strength to open it. I was hollowed out, a ghost haunting the evidence of my own foolish, sacrificial love. I had poured everything I was onto the altar of my son's future, and he had simply lit a match and walked away. I found myself asking the same questions, over and over, a painful, spiraling loop in my head. Why did this hurt so much? It wasn't just the money, it was the erasure. Why was I so easy to erase? Because I had made myself the foundation, the invisible support structure for his success. Why did I do that? To protect him. Why did he need my protection? So he would never have to feel the fear and desperation that had fueled me my entire life. And what was my reward for that protection? He had taken my fortress and locked me out in the cold. The bitter irony was that I had succeeded. I had raised a son who had no fear, not even the fear of destroying his own mother. After a week of drowning in this toxic loop, a storm rolled in. A fierce, angry thunderstorm that rattled the windows. A steady drip began in the ceiling of the guest bedroom, a leak from the attic. Something inside me snapped. I would not let this house, Tom's house, fall apart. Not like this. Fueled by a sudden hot surge of anger, I pulled down the rickety attic stairs and climbed into the dusty, suffocating darkness. I would find the leak. I would fix it. I would do something. The attic was a graveyard of my past. Cardboard boxes labeled in my fading handwriting were stacked everywhere. Michael, school projects. Tom, college textbooks. Eleanor's kitchen, first-year tax records. I waded through the ghosts, the air thick with the smell of old paper and forgotten time. And then I saw it, tucked away behind a stack of photo albums. A simple cedar box, no bigger than a shoebox. It wasn't labeled. It didn't need to be. My heart gave a painful lurch. I hadn't seen it in over a decade. I carried it back downstairs, my hands trembling. I set it on the kitchen table, my own kitchen table, the one where I'd helped Michael with his homework for years. A fine layer of dust coated the dark wood. I wiped it away with the sleeve of my sweater. The brass latch was stiff, but it finally clicked open. Inside, nestled in the darkness, were hundreds of 4x 6-inch index cards. They were filled with my own handwriting, the looping cursive of my youth. Some cards were yellowed with age, others splotched with faint, ghostly stains of vanilla, butter, or chocolate. Grandma Catherine's lemon bars, signature carrot cake with cream cheese frosting, savory mushroom and Gruyere tartlets. It was all here. The heart, the soul, the entire DNA of my life's work. I lifted one of the cards. The lemon bar recipe, the one that had paid for Michael's first tricycle. I traced the faded blue ink with my finger, and in that moment, a profound, earth-shattering clarity washed over me. Michael had taken the company. He had taken the buildings, the trucks, the bank accounts, and the soulless corporate name. He had taken the shell. He had taken the prison I had built for myself. But he hadn't taken this. He hadn't taken the magic. He couldn't, because it was never in the name on the door. It was in my hands. It was in my head. It was in this box. He took the company, but he didn't take its soul. That was mine. And it was time to take it back. I stood up and walked over to the sink, my movements no longer slow and heavy, but sharp and precise. I washed my hands. I tied on an old apron I found hanging on a hook. The grief was still there, a hot coal in my chest, but now it was joined by something else, something powerful, a cold, clean, and righteous fury. I went back to the table, pulled out a clean sheet of paper and a pen, and sat down. The ghost of Eleanor Cooper, the silent, self-sacrificing mother, was gone. Eleanor, the baker, the fighter, the founder, was back. And she was about to write a new recipe, the one for revenge. The cold fury of my revelation lasted through the night. By morning, it had cooled into something harder and more useful, a plan. My first call wasn't to a friend for comfort, it was to a name I'd gotten from a trusted colleague years ago. Jessica Chen, an attorney who specialized in small business and intellectual property law. Her office was in a modest but professional building downtown, a world away from the glass and steel tower Michael now occupied. I walked in not as a grieving mother, but as a client. I carried a single, thick file folder. Inside was everything. A timeline of events I had written out during the night, copies of the original incorporation papers for Eleanor's kitchen, the resolution I'd signed creating the board of directors, and the glossy proposal for Project Ascent that Michael had used to sell me on my own demise. I also brought the cedar box full of recipes. It sat on the table between us like a silent, powerful witness. Jessica Chen was a woman in her 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She didn't offer platitudes or sympathies. She offered me a cup of coffee and said, "Okay, Eleanor, start from the beginning. Tell me the facts." I did. I laid out the story as a sequence of business decisions, not a family tragedy. I detailed the modernization plan, the creation of the board, the transfer of administrative passwords, the final, fatal meeting. I was calm, precise, and objective. When I finished, I pushed the folder across the table to her. "The question is," I said, "what, if anything, can I do about it?" She spent the next 20 minutes in silence, reading through the documents. The only sounds were the rustle of paper and the quiet ticking of the clock on her wall. The silence was unnerving, but I waited. I had shed all my tears. Now all I had left was patience. Finally, she leaned back and looked at me, her expression unreadable. "Well, Eleanor, I'll give you the bad news first, because there's no sense in sugarcoating it. From a corporate law perspective, your son's actions were impeccable." The word hit me like a physical blow. Impeccable. "Based on these documents," she continued, tapping the folder, "you willingly voted to create the board. You gave him the authority to appoint new members. You signed the resolutions that gave him the power to take on debt and restructure. Legally, you handed him the keys to the car and signed over the title. You can't now claim he stole it just because you don't like where he's driving it. A lawsuit for wrongful termination or shareholder oppression would be a bloody, expensive, years-long battle, and frankly, I don't think you'd win." The last flicker of hope for an easy fix died. There would be no judge to reverse this, no legal magic wand, just the cold, hard consequences of my own misplaced trust. I must have looked as defeated as I felt, because Jessica leaned forward, her voice softening slightly but losing none of its intensity. "But," she said, and my head snapped up. "That's the car. That's the corporation. Let's talk about the engine. What actually makes the business run?" She gestured to the cedar box. "These recipes. I see the company's asset purchase agreements from when you incorporated. I see lists of ovens, delivery vans, real estate. I don't see a single document in here pertaining to intellectual property. Was there ever a formal transfer? Did you ever sign a contract that explicitly sold or assigned the rights to these specific recipes to Eleanor's Kitchen, LLC? My mind raced back through decades of paperwork. "No," I said slowly. "They were just mine. They were the company, but they were mine. We never thought to separate them. People as Ravard." A slow, wolfish grin spread across Jessica's face. "Then he doesn't own them. Michael and his investors own a collection of buildings, ovens, and a brand name that is, as of right now, completely dependent on your trade secrets. He owns the kitchen, Eleanor. He doesn't own the instructions for how to cook. The car is useless because you are the only one with the formula for the fuel." For the first time in months, I felt the fog in my brain begin to clear. "So I can sue him for intellectual property theft?" "You could," she said, nodding. "But it's still a fight. He could countersue, claiming they were work for hire. It would get messy. It would take years. And it would make lawyers like me very rich. But there is another way. A faster, cleaner, more powerful way." She leaned forward, her eyes locked on mine. "Don't fight him in a courtroom. Fight him in the marketplace. A judge has to follow the letter of the law you signed. But customers? They follow their hearts. They follow authenticity. And they love a good comeback story." The air in the room shifted. This was no longer a legal consultation. It was a strategy session, a war council. "He has the debt," she said, ticking points off on her fingers. "He has the overhead of those big locations. He has investors breathing down his neck, demanding growth and returns. He is in a very expensive, very inflexible position. And you? You have your name, your reputation, your life's work in that box, and you are nimble. You can start small, with a fraction of the costs he has." The blueprint began to form in my mind, a beautiful, brilliant structure of righteous revenge. I wouldn't sue him for a dime. I wouldn't drag our family name through the mud of a public court battle. I would simply go back to the beginning. I would take my name, my recipes, and my story, and I would build something new, something better, something that he could never touch. "Don't sue him," Jessica said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Starve him." I left her office an hour later, with a clear head and a fire in my belly. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a competitor. And the market was about to become a very cold, very unforgiving place for my son. A legal blueprint is one thing. A physical reality is another. My lawyer Jessica had given me the strategy. Now I had to build the army. The first soldier I had to recruit was myself. I went to the bank the next day and stood before a teller, a woman half my age. "I'd like to transfer $100,000 from my personal savings into a new business checking account," I said. The number felt huge and terrifying coming out of my mouth. It was 2/3 of my entire life's savings, the safety net I had so carefully woven for my retirement. It was the ultimate bet, placed entirely on myself. With the capital secured, I started the hunt. But I wasn't looking for a prime retail location with big glass windows. I was looking for a ghost, a forgotten space in an industrial park, a small commercial kitchen tucked away in a part of town that corporate real estate agents ignored. My old company was a battleship, huge, powerful, drowning in overhead, and slow to turn. My new venture needed to be a speedboat, small, lean, and fast. After 2 weeks of searching, I found it. A 1,500 square foot box with concrete floors, a roll-up garage door, and a lingering smell of old machinery. It was ugly. It was perfect. The landlord, a gruff man who seemed impressed that I didn't flinch at the grit, gave me a decent lease. I signed it on the hood of my car. That night, sitting on the floor of my new, empty kitchen, the echo of my footsteps unnervingly loud, I made the most important phone call of my life. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang 3 times. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was weary. It was Maria, my head baker, my friend. "Maria, it's Eleanor." There was a sharp intake of breath. "Eleanor? My God, I've been so worried. I heard what happened. Are you all right?" "I am now," I said, a lump forming in my throat. "Listen, I know you quit," Dave told me. "I'm sorry I wasn't there." "It wasn't the same," she said, her voice dropping. "That boy, your son, he brought in consultants with stopwatches, timing my bakers. He wanted to replace my European butter with a cheaper butter blend to save 12 cents a pastry. He said it was a negligible sensory difference. I told him there was nothing negligible about integrity. I couldn't work for a spreadsheet. I had to leave. My heart ached with a mixture of pride and guilt. "Maria, I have a crazy question for you. I'm sitting on the floor of a very small, very empty kitchen in an industrial park off Route 71. I have my old recipe box, a new bank account, and a whole lot of fight left in me. I can't pay you what he was paying you. Not yet, but I can offer you a partnership. A chance to build something real again, from the ground up. No consultants, no butter blends, just us." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for a full 10 seconds. Then I heard a sound that I would never forget. It was a soft, choked sob, followed by a fierce, clear voice. "When do we start, boss?" The second call was to Frank Peterson at the dairy farm. His wife answered, and her voice was cold when she told me he was busy. I deserved that. "Please, just tell him it's Eleanor Cooper," I said. "It's important." A minute later, Frank's gruff voice was on the line. "Eleanor." It was not a question. "Frank," I began, my voice steady. "First, I want to apologize. What my son's company did to you, and to the others, was wrong. It was a betrayal of a 25-year relationship, and I am ashamed of it. I then told him everything, about my new tiny kitchen, about Maria coming back, about my plan. I didn't ask him for anything. I just wanted him to hear it from me. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "So, this new place," he finally said. "You'll be needing cream? Butter?" "I will," I said, "but I can pay you cash on delivery. I won't ask for credit, not after what happened. Thank you for watching." I heard him chuckle, a low rumble. "Eleanor, my father trusted your father. I've trusted you my entire adult life. You're not a corporation. You're a Cooper. Your credit is good with me. Tell me what you need. My first delivery truck will be there Monday morning, 7 a.m. sharp." A few days later, the three of us stood in the clean, empty space. Maria, me, and Frank's oldest son, who he'd sent over with a crew to help us install some used ovens we'd bought at auction. We were a tiny, unlikely army, fueled by loyalty and a shared belief in doing things the right way. We had a kitchen, a team, and the best ingredients in the state. We just needed a name. Maria looked at the cedar box sitting on a stainless steel prep table, the only pristine object in the entire room. "It has to have your name in it," she said. "That's the whole point. People trusted Eleanor's kitchen." "But that name isn't mine anymore," I said, a fresh wave of pain hitting me. "It belongs to his corporation now. It stands for debt and disrespect." I walked over to the box and ran my hand over the smooth, aged wood. This was the source. This was the truth. Everything that had ever mattered, everything that had ever been good and pure about my business, had started right here. Not with a brand, but with an idea. An original recipe. "That's it," I said, a sudden, powerful certainty washing over me. The name came to my lips, simple, defiant, and true. "We're not Eleanor's kitchen. We're something new, something that gets back to the very beginning." I looked at Maria, my eyes shining with a light she hadn't seen in years. "We're Eleanor's Originals." We didn't launch Eleanor's Originals with a press release or a grand opening party. We launched with a phone call. An old client, the same law firm that had given me my first big break decades ago, tracked me down. Their usual caterer had fallen through. "I know it's a long shot, Eleanor," the office manager said, "but I was hoping you might be back in business." "As of this morning," I told her, "I am." For the first few weeks, that's how we operated. A ghost kitchen, before that was even a trendy term. We were a secret whispered among a handful of my most loyal old clients. Maria and I worked 12-hour days in our small, humming kitchen, surrounded by the glorious smell of real butter browning and bread baking. There were no spreadsheets, no consultants, no talk of optimizing assets. There was only the work, and it felt like breathing again after being held underwater for a year. The turning point came in the form of an email from a woman named Sarah Jenkins, a local food journalist who ran the city's most respected food blog. The subject line was simple: "A rumor?" Her email was direct. She'd heard from 3 separate sources in 1 week that the real Eleanor was back in business, operating out of an unmarked kitchen in an industrial park. She wanted the story. Remembering Jessica's advice, I invited her to the kitchen the next day. I didn't have a conference room, so we sat at a stainless steel prep table while Maria shaped scones in the background. Sarah was smart, and her questions were sharp. I didn't have to sling any mud. I just told her the truth, calmly and factually. I told her about my dream, about Michael's ambition, about the board meetings, and about the recipes in the cedar box. I didn't frame it as a tragedy. I framed it as a story of a woman who had lost her company but found her purpose again. The article went live on a Tuesday morning. The headline was a cannon shot. "They took her name but not her soul. The real Eleanor is back, and she's cooking with a vengeance." Ada's no-sode. Sarah had told my story, but she had also done some digging of her own. She'd spoken anonymously to a dozen former employees who had quit EK Provisions, all of whom cited declining quality and a toxic corporate culture. She'd interviewed customers who complained that the new Eleanor's kitchen felt like a sterile airport cafe, and she'd found public records of the $5 million loan, contrasting it with the stories of unpaid local suppliers. What happened next was something I could never have predicted. It was more than just a viral story. It was a community immune response. The city treated Michael's corporation like a foreign virus and rallied to protect the original. The article was shared over 10,000 times on Facebook in the first 24 hours. The comments section was a tidal wave of righteous anger and heartfelt support. A woman wrote, "Eleanor's kitchen catered my wedding. Their carrot cake is part of my family's story. This new EK Provisions is a cheap knockoff, and we won't stand for it." A man commented, "This is what happens when you let a kid with an MBA and no soul run a local treasure into the ground." By noon that day, our one phone line was ringing so incessantly that I had to let it go to voicemail. By 3 o'clock, our inbox had crashed from the sheer volume of catering requests. Maria had to call 2 of our old bakers and beg them to come in and help, and they were there within the hour, tying on aprons with tears in their eyes. The next morning, when Frank Peterson arrived with his dairy delivery, he had to park on the street because our small lot was already full of cars from people trying to find us, knocking on our door and asking if they could please just buy a dozen scones. A week later, out of a morbid curiosity I couldn't suppress, I drove past one of my old locations, the flagship store, the one that used to have lines out the door on a Saturday. The beautiful, warm Eleanor's Kitchen sign was gone, replaced by the cold, ugly EK Provisions logo. I parked across the street and watched. It was 12:30 inches the afternoon, the peak of the lunch rush. I counted 7 customers inside. 7. The cavernous space looked empty, pathetic. I saw Michael's sleek BMW parked out front. I wondered what he was telling his investors. I wondered what corporate jargon he was using to explain away the deafening silence of a city that had turned its back on him. I expected to feel a surge of triumph, of gloating satisfaction, but I didn't. Staring at the empty shell of my old life, I just felt a quiet, profound sadness for the boy I had lost. Because my vindication wasn't there, in his failure. It was back at my own little kitchen, in the beautiful, joyful chaos of ringing phones and flour-dusted surfaces. It was in the faces of my old employees who had come home. It was in the taste of a lemon bar, made exactly the right way. My success wasn't about his ruin, it was about my resurrection. And for the first time in a very long time, I was truly, completely, my own. A year can change everything. It's a brisk Tuesday in September, and I'm standing not in a sterile boardroom or a gritty industrial park, but in the heart of my new life. Eleanor's Originals now occupies a charming corner storefront in the historic part of town, with big windows that let the morning sun pour in. The space is a quarter of the size of my old flagship location, and 10 times as happy. The air is thick with the scent of cinnamon and cardamom, and the low hum of conversation from the regulars who now start their day here is the only soundtrack I need. We're busy, but it's a manageable, joyful kind of busy. The chaos is ours, and we control it. My life, like my business, is smaller now, and infinitely richer for it. For 30 years I wore my business like a suit of armor. It was heavy, it was restrictive, and I thought it was protecting me and my son. But taking it off, I realized it had been a cage. I didn't know who I was without the constant, crushing weight of payroll, expansion, and the relentless pursuit of more. Now, I do. I am a woman who leaves work at 5 o'clock on a Friday. I am a person who has time to tend to the small garden in her backyard. I know the names of all 12 of my employees, their kids' names, and their dreams. I am not a CEO. I am not a chairwoman. I am Eleanor. And that is more than enough. I heard what happened to EK Provisions. Frank Peterson told me a few months ago. The company, burdened by the massive debt Michael had taken on and abandoned by a customer base that refused to be fooled, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The investors, the sharks Michael had invited into our lives, sold off the assets for parts to recoup a fraction of their losses. The brand name he had stolen from me, the one he claimed would be immortal, was worthless. He had won the battle in the boardroom, but in doing so, he had burned his entire kingdom to the ground. There was a time I would have reveled in that news, but when I heard it, I just felt a profound wave of pity. He had been so obsessed with building an empire that he never learned how to build a life. He had a multi-million-dollar education in business, but he didn't understand the first thing about value. The real vindication, I learned, is quiet. It isn't a moment of victory. It's a state of being. My value was never a number on a balance sheet. It was never measured by the size of my sacrifice or the height of my son's ambition. My worth was in my own two hands. It was in the knowledge I held, the resilience I discovered, and the integrity I refused to lose. The greatest lesson of my betrayal was this: the sacrifices we make for others are only meaningful if we don't sacrifice ourselves in the process. My independence, I discovered, wasn't something to be given to my son. It was something to be reclaimed for myself. This morning, a young woman named Chloe, our newest baker, is struggling with a batch of croissants. Her shoulders are slumped in frustration. "I don't get it, Eleanor," she says, gesturing to the flat, lifeless pastry on her workbench. I followed the recipe exactly. I walk over, wiping my hands on my apron. I don't look at the recipe card. I look at her hands. "You're thinking too much," I tell her gently, "and your hands are too warm. You have to learn to feel the dough. It tells you what it needs." I take a block of cold butter and show her how to laminate it into the dough, the gentle, rhythmic process of folding and turning. I'm not just teaching her a technique. I'm passing on a feeling, a piece of knowledge that can't be written down in a business plan. She watches my hands, her eyes wide with concentration and a dawning understanding. As we work, a real, genuine smile spreads across her face. In that moment, watching the spark of passion ignite in someone else, I feel a sense of peace that no amount of money or corporate success could ever buy. I am building a new legacy. Not one of obligation, but one of inspiration. My story is about the devastating cost of silent sacrifice, but it's also proof that it's never too late to reclaim your own name. If you've ever felt devalued, share your story in the comments, and subscribe to The Silent Lie for more stories of justice and vindication.